So, beginning with the final section here, you might be wondering, why are we going to answer some of the same questions that we already answered with autopsy? And the reason for that is that it's actually a lot easier to do with Registry Explorer here, particularly with these bookmarks. The other thing is it's important to understand why these are here and why they're in their associated keys, because you're going to need to know which root key to look in even with Registry Explorer helping you out. It's also just good to know what all this contains and get a feel for what it actually looks like. Okay, so getting started with question 2 here, we're looking for the operating system used on this computer. So we're going to start out in the software hive here. And the reason for that is that this is about the operating system. So it wouldn't be specific to the user. It wouldn't be the system itself, which is more hardware related. So software makes sense for anything related to the operating system. And we'll look under bookmarks first because that's the easiest way to do it. And you'll see that we have two that talk about Windows version information here in their descriptions. So let's just start with this first one. We've got Windows key versus NT key. And if you look at these values that are in it and their data, you'll see that this is actually just a list of directories and mounting points for Windows to use. So we'll just move on and try that other one with NT in it. And there we go. We've got the guy's name. We've got that it's Windows XP. We've got a product ID, all sorts of stuff that we're looking for. The reason for this is that Windows NT actually refers to the whole family of operating systems that Windows runs. So anything under the Windows NT key, its subkeys are going to be related directly to the operating system, as opposed to the other one, which just seemed to be some kind of reference. Uh, so the takeaway from this pretty much is that the registry is just a hodgepodge of different subkeys. They've been maintained over many different versions of Windows, but they'll have consistencies. Anything that's within the Windows NT family is likely to have this same registry path, whether it's an earlier or later version. Why would they have the Windows and Windows NT keys separate is pretty much just up to the people that made Windows. This is sort of like looking into their minds and trying to psychically divine how it is that they set all of this up. But that's why we have these bookmarks. That's why I'm giving you this walkthrough so that you can better understand what's going on behind the scenes and hopefully find what you're looking for a lot faster. So moving on to question number 3 here, what is the install date? You'll see that we have the answer here in this same location. However, that doesn't really look like a date to me. Luckily, Registry Explorer will help you out some here if you right click and open up this data interpreter. Now we've got a window that shows us the different possible values that this string could stand for. And if you look at the value type, that provides a hint as well. But we know that we've got a timestamp, and this has interpretations as several different times. Based on the scope of the investigation, 2012 would have been the future, so that doesn't really make any sense for this to be a 32-bit DOS FAT timestamp. So it could be either one of these second two here. At least we've narrowed it down. Now here's where the registry gets a little bit cumbersome because Windows actually uses all sorts of different timestamps, including these other ones that are 64-bit, so you can rule them out as well for now. But it's just a hodgepodge. Each team that works on each separate part of it, I guess, likes to do things differently. So essentially, you just have to look up within that key and value, Google what type of timestamp they use here, and you'll find that this is actually a Unix type timestamp, and this almost matches our answer key. It's a little bit off because this is in UTC time. You have to know the time zone in order to change that over to the answer that they've got, but it is correct. So just keep that in mind. Also, some of those books I recommended go into extensive detail on where all of these are, so you can always keep those as a reference. Easier just to Google it in this case, though. Now, question 4 asks us about that time zone, and you can see it's not here. So this is actually going to be under the system root key. And the reason for that is if you think about it, there's going to be a lot of functions of the computer that rely on system time before the OS even loads. So it makes sense that we're going to find it under here. The system key is also going to contain a lot of other information on hardware, uh, interfaces that you plug in, including internet and ports. It's going to include the file system on the disk and basically anything else that it needs in order to boot up before the OS gets on it. So let's just go to bookmarks, common, and you will see that we actually have time zone info right here. So that's real easy. So we've got Central Standard Time here under standard name, and then if you look at daylight name, you'll see that during daylight savings time, it's called Central Daylight Time. This daylight bias, even though you can't really interpret it there, if you have data interpreter take it, and you look at Microsoft's documentation online, you'll see that -60 is actually the correct value here. Just means that it rolls back by 60 minutes when daylight starts, which is another value you can find and look up here. So that's our time zone information, and based on other dates on here, you'll be able to figure out whether daylight savings time was happening or not, which is just a fun American thing to confuse you. Now, if you've learned a bit about the registry yourself, you've probably heard about the current control set subkey that this is supposedly under. But if you look down here, you'll see we're actually under control set 001. And the reason for that is that this is not a live system. Therefore, none of these control sets are actually current. If you do go looking through the tree here, you'll see that we have control set 001 and 002, and this is how it always works. 002 is actually a backup because, like I said, the system hive here contains all of your information about your hardware, and Windows backs that up, so these two should be identical pretty much all the time, and it just reverts to 002 anytime something gets so critically messed up that it's unable to boot. Next up, we'll take a look at number 7 here. What is the primary domain name? Now, you might think that because this has to do with external connections that it would be under system, but if you think about it, the system is only going to handle the ports that your Ethernet or wireless controller would plug into, not the actual domain itself. The OS is going to handle that. So we'll go to the software key and we'll look at our bookmarks there. And there is actually one that is called default domain name. So actually, I just realized there is not a bookmark for this. I just bookmarked it myself in the past, but this being my VM, I don't have it. So our location is under software, like we said, and then Microsoft, and then Windows NT, which should sound familiar. And current version. And then when logon, and by the way, you can just click on one of these and start typing and it'll take you to the closest matching one, but that's not always such a great idea because as you can see, it opened up some more subkeys rather than searching just within that one. So just scroll down and there's your when logon key and you have your default domain name. So that is our answer to number 7. And like I covered in the autopsy portion, the answer key says that the domain name is just called evil, but we searched all over and that doesn't seem to exist. It's just this in-1 and so on. So if you want to bookmark it yourself, you can just come up here to bookmarks and manage, well, actually easier way since we've already got the location here, add bookmark. Next, we're going to take a look at number 8, which asks us for the last recorded shutdown time for the system. When you think about it, that current control set that we talked about earlier, which is not current right now because it's not live, it makes sense that it might log the shutdown time, seeing as how it's got a backup and it needs to know whether it needs to back up from the last one. So if you go under here and, well, let's just look at the bookmarks actually. We actually have Windows last shutdown time right here, which is real easy to work with. And there's our time. Just need to interpret that one with a right click. And we only have one of these that makes any sense, and that's 2004. It's a Windows file time type of timestamp. So there are a myriad of ways that you could have gotten to this, but another one that I do want to introduce here is through the Prefetcher. When Windows runs executables, it uses this as basically a shortcut to find the executables so that it doesn't have to keep searching for them within the folders for that program. So this prefetcher actually runs the whole time that Windows is running, and it logs any time that it stops running as its last exit time. And that's going to be under software here because it's handled by the operating system, obviously. And we're just going to take a little shortcut by using these because it's under this Windows NT current version. It's one of the subkeys called Prefetcher. And if you look over here, you've got exit time. And if you look at the type, you'll see that it's regSZ, which is actually ASCII. So this is not like our other timestamps. If you use data interpreter, you're not going to get anything that makes any sense. This is actually just ASCII text right here. And with that, it also takes the time zone into account for it. Again, that's just the way that they decided to do it for this. You kind of just have to figure that out as you go and look it up. If you want to know a bit more about prefetch files, obviously there's those 13 cubed videos I was talking about, but also in the text version of my walkthrough, I go back into autopsy and show them to you as well as what they have and what they can tell you. So just take a look at this same spot in the walkthrough. It's number 8 under the Registry Explorer questions. Next up, we've got number 10, which just asks who mostly uses the computer. The easiest way to get this is just going to go back to the software root key here. And if we look at our Win login information from earlier, you can see that Mr. Evil is the default user, so most likely he's going to use it the most. Another thing you could do is go through all of the intuser.dat files, which would mean exporting each of them. But, you know, in the interests of thoroughness, it's a good idea. And you can look at things like this run MRU, which tells you programs that were run. So it'll give you an idea of how much it's been used potentially, typed URLs. There's just going to be a whole lot under here that's going to tell you about what this user was using and how often and give you timestamps. So it's all going to be pretty useful to you from a forensic standpoint. Next up, we'll real quickly look at number 13, which asks about network cards used by the computer, and this is one of the strengths of this program here, in addition to the fact that you can just go straight into the software key and find this list of network cards, plainly written, which in this case you got to look at the subkeys over here, and they're given numbers, but when you click on them, you'll see it actually gives you the name as far as the data here. You get the name of each of the network cards, so you don't have to go and look them up, which is really nice. But you might be thinking these network cards are hardware, right? Or at least they can be. So shouldn't they be under the system key? Well, they are also under the system key. And if you go here and you look at network adapters right at the top here, then we have some of the same information. The only thing is that it's each of these subkeys that contains it, and it's going to be a lot harder to find, but you can see Zercom card bus, that's going to be our Ethernet port, so we've got the same thing, but we've also got all these other devices and adapters and ports, so it's just a little bit messier, which is what you would expect of information that isn't going through the OS, but rather the system itself. So now we're going to take a look at installed programs with number 16, and there's going to be 3 different ways to find these, and they're all under the software key here. This first one isn't bookmarked. Also, side note about all of these, I'm not sure whether they would show you apps that have only been installed for a particular user, so you might want to look under the user's int user.dat file for that, but for regularly installed programs, this will do fine. First one, not bookmarked, you're going to go under software key, Microsoft Windows, current version, and then there's this thing called app paths, which has subkeys for each of the installed programs. So you're going to get a nice little list. Some of them are going to have a little bit more information about them, like version, but for the most part, these are literally just paths to the apps. Second one is you can look at uninstall data. So that's going to be under current version as well. And most anything that installs is going to have an uninstall option. So you look under that, and we have a whole bunch of these as well with kind of nicer names to look at than that last one had, and not really a whole lot else besides that. Now for this last one here, we're going to go software key and then classes. And if you open this up to its subkeys, these are all of the different file extensions that are in use on this computer. And it's going to tell you, it just maps them out to what application they're going to run with. So if you start making your way through these, this isn't going to be the case with all of them, like txt, it's just a very common file. I guess that's why it doesn't have it. But if you go to something like WMV, it'll have this open with list subkey. And then under that, the subkeys are the executables that it's going to open up with. And if we try some other random one, you can see we get same results, probably VXD up here does not have it. So it's a little bit hit or miss. And if we go down to like the zip extension here, it's not going to have it because it considers this a folder essentially. Well, actually it does have open with program IDs, but there's not really anything here. So hit or miss, but this will give you some information on what's installed on a system. So now, because we said we were going to come back to it, we'll take a look at number 19, which asks which 2 installed programs show the news feeds that are subscribed to by this Mr. Evil account. So if we start looking under the software key, because as you may recall, we saw a string referring to a news URL under software, and that reminds us of this key now that we know about it. If you look under clients here, and I only know this because I did a quick search for the word news, you'll see that we have something, and it says Outlook Express, and we can dig a little bit deeper into each of these. We've got Outlook and Forte, so we know which programs, just like we thought. However, the further in you dig, the more you realize that this is just going to be a series of uh, pointers. It doesn't actually have the URLs, so you're not going to find a whole lot of information in here. But at the very least, it does tell you uh, which programs are going to be using NNTP and going to be the news sources for this. So that's at least useful for these purposes. Now, very last question that we're going to do here. It's come a long way. We're going to look at question 28, how many executable files are in the recycle bin? We already answered that fully, but as you may recall, we found it under C, recycler, and then this long string of numbers, which is called a UID, and each user has one. And if there's more than one user, you won't know whose recycle bin you're looking at. So we're going to be looking at users. It makes sense that we'll be under the software key, right? And if we look at bookmarks, we've got a profile list showing SIDs. Sorry, I have been meaning to say SID this whole time. But as you can see here, we have these different IDs as subkeys, and you may recognize these. This one's the local service. These are the different accounts that we looked at, and only one of these looks to be any longer than that because that is the SID format of an actual user, and it maps it out to Mr. Evil for you. Nice and easy. So profile list key under the Windows NT current version, which is where we found almost everything on this, is also where you're going to find these SIDs so you can map them out. They're going to come in handy for a number of different keys throughout the registry. We'll probably talk about some more of the keys like SAM, Security Account Manager, and some of the other stuff in the next walkthrough, the data leakage case. That one's got a lot more questions, so I'm going to try to run through it a little bit quicker. Hopefully you guys learned plenty from this. Let me know if there is anything you feel like this was missing or if it had too much of something. Also let me know if you prefer the video or the text format of the walkthrough because it takes a long time to make both. And if nobody likes one of them, I'm happy to drop one. Thanks for watching.